welcome to Japan Expert Insights. As always, we got Maya here from Tokyo, and I am in Chicago in what appears to be a very folksy place. And that's because I am actually broadcasting tonight from my parents. I'm doing a little dog sitting while they're gallivanting out in Ireland. So, Maya, how are you doing today?
Oh, thank you. I'm doing great. This is the second day without any rain this week, and it's going to be the second and only one, I guess, after, because from tomorrow we're going to have a lot of rain. And we've got Mayu here with us. She just joined, so let me bring her up on screen. Here we go.
Hi. Good morning.
Mayu, so happy to see you.
Yeah, good.
Wonderful.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. So yes, thank you for being a part of the show. Usually we just kind of spitball for a couple minutes while everyone's logging in and checking things out. It was interesting in the States. The cartoon Dan to Dan had a movie premiere over the weekend. They played the last episode of season 1 and the first 3 episodes of season 2, and it did really, really well. Dan to Dan is getting a nice cult following here in the States. And for those who don't know, the anime Dan to Dan, it's kind of like if the X-Files was run by a bunch of goofy, cracked out teenagers who do in the paranormal and the UFOs and it's one of those things that Japan does so well. And I'm a big fan of films like this, where something is so over the top, because you can do things that are over the top and it gets kind of silly and cheesy, but for somehow Japan can do things that are just so far over the top. It almost comes back in on itself, and it's like, this is the most entertaining thing I've ever seen in my life. And I think Dan to Dan kind of falls in one of those categories. And so it's been kind of nice to see Japanese entertainment doing so well here. It isn't just Shogun, which we all know. I'm on Shogun. We all love it. And I know Nakamura-san here, and Maya was at talking to Eriko Miyagawa, and that's just a couple weeks ago. And you guys were talking about the film industry. So I've been trying to get Mayu on this show for a long time, and I'm so thrilled to have her on. We met in Chicago a couple years ago, and I had seen the premiere. She Is Me and I Am Her, which is a delightful film. I think it's still available on Saka Films, so I think you go to sakafilms.com, pay $6 and watch it. Watch it tonight or tomorrow if it's too late. Check out She Is Me. I know that's like your most latest movie, but it's one that I'm particularly fond of since we saw it together. And Nakamura-san is a film director, and she does wonderful independent films. And we're going to talk to her tonight about making those films. So Nakamura-san, thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you.
So the first thing we always like to ask our guests is, why do you do what you love to do? Why do you love to direct films? What was it that?
It's a very good question. I love film since I was a teenager, since I remember. So I've been always wanting to make a film, like become a film director. And so I studied at NYU graduate film, and I took Spike Lee class, and I came back to Japan after I graduated from NYU, made my first feature called Summer of Stickleback, which premiered at Busan. And after that, I've been making a lot of documentaries and fiction, because it wasn't easy to make my second film right after my first. My first one wasn't so difficult to make for some reason, but it always the case that your debut film is relatively easier to make because people kind of give you a chance if you're the first comer, but the second one always gets a little hard. So it took me a while to make my second film, which is Intimate Stranger, which is a psychological thriller, and it premiered at Tokyo International Film Festival. And the third film, which is She's Me, I'm Her, which Michael mentioned earlier. So somehow the third film happened relatively quickly, because it was about kind of 4 different women living during the pandemic, played by one actress. But because of the pandemic, we had a lot of grants and whatnot, so it was easier to make a film. Ironically,
yeah.
So when you were starting out, what films or filmmakers influenced you? I mean, you went to Spike Lee class, so obviously you might have picked up a couple of things there, but were there any particular films or influences that you
What
found?
I because I studied at NYU, I love Jim Jarmusch films.
Oh, he's
But
wonderful.
I love more obscure ones like Christoph Krzyzewski. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. The guy who did the Decalogue series.
Kilowski,
Yeah,
Christoph,
yeah.
yes. I love him. Three Colors trilogy is one of my favorite film
Yeah,
series of all
I
time.
love his films, and also, of course, John Cassavetes, American indie Godfather. So those kind of films I like. So obviously not so mainstream.
So when you pick the movies you mentioned,
Mhm.
what and we'll get into the more filmmaking process in a bit, but I was kind of curious as to like why you chose those. Like you did a psychological thriller, you did She's Me. Like what?
Mhm.
How do you make that choice? Like why did you decide to do your movies in that order? Or was there any particular reason?
There's no particular reason for the order.
Mhm.
It's just actually I like different genre. Like a psychological thriller, I like, but I also like more straightforward drama, bit of a comedy. So like it seems like I make really different kind of film each time. I mean, documentaries is the same. Like I take the same kind of interest with the documentaries. Like I made one about I did the film called Alone in Fukushima, which is about this guy who remained in nuclear zone with animals in Fukushima. I followed him for 8 years. So every film is different, and I'm interested in not just one genre, but different kinds of genre.
And that was on NHK, right? The Fukushima, the documentary.
It wasn't NHK. It sort of stemmed from my documentary work on disaster stricken areas in Tohoku region. At the time, I wasn't allowed to go to Fukushima. It was 2013, like
Yeah.
off limit area. So I had to do it independently because they didn't allow me to go there. So
Yeah, it was still early after the disaster, and they
yeah,
were still, dealing with the aftermath. I
hmm
mean, yeah, they still continue, but that was really a tense period of time.
yeah.
Now, the,
I kept going. I somehow able to sort of sneak in there, and I kept going for 8 years. So
yeah. So you talked about like getting into this a little bit, you make your first film and your second film, and that it was a lot harder to make the second film.
yeah, it's
Um,
always
but but what's interesting is I mean, if anybody, as you know, in the business, but for our viewers who may not,
hmm
anytime you're making a film is hard.
hmm
Doc Haynes sense, he used the phrase that even making a bad movie is hard.
hmm
No one ever intends to make a bad movie. A lot of times, everyone's trying to make a great film, but there's just
hmm
so many moving parts. It's
hmm
such a difficult process. There's
hmm
so many different opinions, the studios, or even if you're working in independent, budget, time, performers. So many things can go wrong
hmm
making a film. So even in the most ideal circumstances, filmmaking is hard.
hmm
So I'd love to talk about your experiences making your first film and then your second film and how those two compared and contrasted.
My first film, Summer of Stickleback, I started writing when I was in NYU, like maybe second, because the NYU is about 30 a program, and I think I started writing about second year, and it was more about me growing up in Kyoto. It was kind of based on friends' family story in Kyoto, and so I came back to Japan to shoot that, and I think with the first feature, I have a theory that a lot of my NYU graduate film friends, some of them are successful filmmakers. Some of them in scripted series, but everybody, at least gets to make like a one feature film. The question is how you can go from the first feature, because the first feature, I think people give you a chance. Like you're young filmmaker, they kind of, you know, invest in your possibility. But
Mhm.
the second, it kind of, it really gives you a bit of a trial, because I think they really try to size you up whether you're going to be commercially successful, if you're going to be, because everybody has a story to tell.
Mhm.
I don't have a theory like you can tell. At least you have a story about yourself somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
But the second film onwards, you got to tell a story about other people.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
I teach some film classes, and I will say, like, my film teachers also said everybody has at least one story that you want to tell, which is closer to themselves, and it's easier for you to tell that story. But from second film onwards, you have to make film about other people, and then you gotta have an interest, and you gotta do research. You have to persuade people to invest money into that film. So I think the second film really, I have a theory, like everybody can get to make a first feature, and some people maybe never. But the question is whether you can, if you can qualify yourself as a filmmaker, is really second film onwards,
Yeah.
because that's the harder one to crack.
Well, I'm still trying to make my first feature, so I don't know. I mean, I think you're way ahead of the game. I'm
No.
still working on it, but we'll get there one day,
Mhm.
maybe. But yeah, it's also too because you mentioned it being a business, which is true.
Mhm.
If your first film's a runaway success, you
Mhm.
have no problem doing a second film. But even a moderate success doesn't quite, attract the attention.
Mhm.
Kind of this too, because there's a documentary going around here about the first John Wick film. And
Mhm.
it's amazing to know that even that movie, which now, I mean, my gosh, it's like a
Mhm.
$1 million franchise, but how hard it was to get money for that, how nobody had any faith in that. They literally, and it's once again like almost every great story of like a success, that
Mhm.
even something like that, which almost seems like a gimme, like seems like, well, that
Mhm.
makes perfect sense. You can't are shooting people? Well, who wouldn't want to see this? Like
Mhm.
how hard it was to make that.
Mhm.
And unless that movie had made money, that's the big thing.
Mhm.
That's it. It's gone. It's done. Everybody goes back to, painting fences or whatever, like just doing
Mhm.
things. So yes, it seems like that the financial part is, and also too, I would imagine if let's say your first film had made like was a runaway success,
Mhm.
they would want you to make one just like it for your second film and not do something different. I would.
Yeah, I mean, even if you made like a successful film, The One Cut of the Dead was a huge indie success,
Mhm.
but it was hard for the director to follow up that success, because
Right.
it's
You
always,
have a different problem now.
yeah, you have a different set of problem, and people have higher expectations, and if your set follow up kind of doesn't match up, then it kind of looks bad.
Yeah.
So there's always, kind of a challenge that come with even with the success, so to speak.
Right. So there is a question we received from a person who is watching us now, and the question is, if you feel comfortable, of course, could you please tell us what was the budget for your first feature?
Mhm.
What budget did you work on?
Uh, it's funny, the budget's kind of going down, because my first feature was about, oh god, it's hard to say it in US dollars now, because the yen is so weak.
Right, it's very weak now. Hmm.
It was about 5,000, like 5,000. Well, I'm not good with numbers.
Gosenman, this is $50,000 if we're
Yeah.
thinking about one to one, right? $1 for
More
100.
like
So it'll be
Yeah.
25 here
And
because it's
now,
almost a 2-to-1 ratio.
yeah, right.
more like 300,000 right
300,000.
now.
300,000. It's not
Okay.
30,000, but
Yeah, because
300,000.
the yen is so weak now. It's like
Yeah.
Right, right. No, I'm still,
40,000 or
yeah, still confused with the number of zeros. That's it.
yeah, 400,000 or 300,000, somewhere around. And then my second feature was a lot less. It's more like it's probably 80,000 in US, or
Hmm.
maybe 10,000. Yeah, 10,000,
Yeah.
more like 10,000.
Then,
So
then,
Yeah, which is, for US production, that's
it's nothing. It's
That's like
like
PBS,
no
maybe.
budget.
Yeah. That's like
It's
local cable access. Yeah.
and I think what's been happening for years now here is that either you have big budget studio features of $1 million, or you get independent feature, which is less than 500,000, and it started off from like 500,000. Is called considered medium budget here, but then it's becoming harder to make that medium budget film. So the scale's going down. So now
Mhm.
people are making film for like 100,000 or less, so like a real shoestring budget. And
Right.
yeah, so that's what's happening here.
And I know, like with Ikeda-san, who was
Mm-hmm.
our first guest,
Mm-hmm.
and she, of course, when you were with Eriko, I wasn't in Japan, so I didn't get the chance to see that. I would have loved to have been there. But I know like Ikeda-san's always kind of rallied, talked about that and said, well, we need to get the budgets higher for
Mm-hmm.
Japanese productions. And I don't know if because there's been such success now in the States
Mm-hmm.
of Japan, like Godzilla Minus One,
Mm-hmm.
Shogun, even though some of these, I know like Shogun was kind of a hybrid American-Japanese production, are we seeing more interest now in sort of upping the ante a little bit in Japanese productions, or is it really not changed much?
It really depends if the studio's involved. Maybe they usually make over $1 million, but still Godzilla's made for like 3 or 4 million. It's like
I thought, but still.
And so yeah, I think the problem here is that people are, film crews are diligent and they work very hard and do a great job for very little money. We don't have a union, so we try not to make, they used to work people really hard. So now they have a system where not to sort of overwork the people. But because we can make films for lower budget, we make like, I think it's 400, 500 films a year.
Mm.
Because we spend like less money, so they end up like producing more films.
Right.
So I don't know which is good or bad. Is that you're able to make films for a lot less money, so you end up producing more films, but maybe not of a quality.
It's interesting because especially with TV series, and maybe it's just because, the algorithm knows what I'm looking for, but I've noticed that streaming services here in the States, like Netflix and Amazon, they're gobbling up Japanese shows left and right. And I know, I wonder if part of that allure is the fact that it's probably not costing them that much, but it's like me are like, oh, I want to check this one out. This looks fantastic. And then you're able to just, serve up that entertainment for very, very low cost. I don't know how to feel about that because I'd like to see people getting paid more for doing work. But at the same time, it is lovely to see that, because I've had this conversation a lot. When I was growing up as a kid at a video store, and that's how I had access to Japanese films. It was only because they made a business decision to have all the VHS tapes that were ever made. And so even growing up in as a farm kid, like in Little Mokine, Illinois, I had access to Kurosawa, Ozu, and anime. Now we can have access to everything if we want to. But because there is this, all eyes seem to be going towards Japan, it is lovely to see more and more interest in if these shows are, maybe I'm hoping makes your life a little easier because you're obviously a seasoned director. Maybe you can do something for Netflix.
Oh, I'm trying, but it's got to be either a big budget, studio films, or like American finance, like Shogun, which is really American production.
Right.
It's Japanese subject, but it's really American production. So so we have to bridge the gap between the independent and the studio somehow, or streamers.
Right. Oh no, sorry. I was going to ask because it's fascinating that you, as Michael said, you're a seasoned director already, and I would think that there are a lot of companies there, filmmaking companies and producing companies and everything, and film studios, that would love to have you
Mhm.
work for them. And well, it seems that you're still looking for budget. You're working on 3 different projects
Mhm.
currently, right? And so I have a couple of questions
Mhm.
actually. The first question is, what are the projects you're working on at the moment, and what are the difficulties you encounter? Because one of them is, as you said, so the budgets for every next film, the budget becomes smaller. But
Mhm.
then, so what is behind it, and are there any other challenges, any other issues that you have to deal with?
Oh, I'm working. It's always like I've been working on several projects. I have about 5, 6 cooking, but the maybe 3 right now are really seriously working because I start putting, making more projects because like, you one project gets stuck and then you start another. So you don't get depressed. So that's how you end up with so many different projects. My main project I'm working on right now is called Wandering Taxi. It's about this young man who drives a taxi for elderly with dementia. So it's a road movie, and I've been working on this for about 10 years actually.
Oh
I had
wow, that's yeah,
I
a
had
long-term project.
different project. I had different producers, because we wanted to go take the films to different directions. So now I'm on to I don't know how many producers now. It's about fifth or fourth or fifth, and yeah, we're trying to make it happen. I don't know why it's taking so long. Maybe it's the subject matter. It's easier here if you pick best-selling novel with like high school kids falling in love, but if you're like picking up like dementia or something a little bit, you know, more social subject, it's a little bit harder.
Mm.
So the other one, I'm also working on this project, which is American project, brought to me by American producer. It's about the kind of a friendship and love story between a Japanese American girl and Mojave boy on the reservation. Uh, you know, I mean, it take place in internment camp or incarceration camp, how they call it. uh, yeah, in Arizona. So this is a historical piece. This one's gonna take a long time to raise money because it's gonna be like 3 million US dollars. So it's gonna take a while. And I have another project which is more about the uh, ecological thriller in Okinawa. So I have like 3.
Right.
So I was just like sort of summarize.
So I have a question because obviously even with your previous film, myself, she is me, I am her. You take on topics that
Mhm,
are, well, quite honestly, they're very sweet
mhm,
and insightful. They're
mhm,
not your typical, obviously, I don't know, sugar sweet kind of
mhm,
thing where it's just you're not doing just like simple rom com.
mhm,
You're picking subjects and stories that are, well, they're very thoughtful.
mhm.
So is there a reason, are you attracted to thoughtful projects? And by the way, even in the States, I think, a taxi cab person, like you might be able to do that for Hallmark if you do it right, but still be kind of cheesy.
Mhm,
Those aren't easy sells,
right,
I think, in any country. So what
mhm.
draws me to that?
I think it's partly because I'm a documentarist too. I'm interested in some real stories that are kind of hidden stories or buried in some history or society. So I guess that sort of comes from me being a documentarian, and the Dementia Project is based on a short story that was written by a friend of mine. So it's not my original idea, but the second film, historical project that was brought to me, but I had interest in Japanese American history, so I took that interest. And the third one, the Okinawan project, it kind of stems from my documentary work in Okinawa that I discovered. It's about the shamans in Okinawa. So
That's, yeah, fascinating because as Michael said, the thought put into the topics and also the angle that you see and the let's say
Mhm,
the issues and the stories from these angles are very unusual, and
mhm,
I think that there is so much value and there is so much to learn from how you see those issues
mhm,
that I just, and again, I'm not in the industry, so of course I'm aware that there are other things that I'm not aware of, but I believe that it's something that a lot of people would appreciate watching because you provide a new perspective, a fresh perspective, right? So, why then, what are the issues that you see? Because you mentioned that your project, the first project you're working about, the taxi driver, the boy there, and the dementia
mhm,
customers. So, it has been going on for 10 years.
mhm.
And well, what are some of the issues you're encountering?
Oh God, it's hard to kind of you know put in they
We have
always.
half an hour. I mean,
Mhm.
feel free to run with it. And by the way, for everybody thank you for the comments we've gotten so far. Feel free, if you have any questions, to fill in those
Well,
comments. I'm
I'm
stalling a
not
little bit so you can
sure
think
about
of your
the
answer. Go for it.
dementia film, but my second film, Intimate Stranger, took a long time to make. It was over 10 years. Was one of the reason was the protagonist was a middle-aged woman.
Mhm.
And that was a more gender issue because although we have more women directors here, the people who investing in films are all men or older men. So my protagonist was a middle-aged woman, and I was told many times that they don't want to see middle-aged women as the main character. Put a younger woman in there. So that was main challenge, and I was very discouraged and very sad, really.
Right, yeah.
And a lot of the very talented actresses, they're all playing the roles of good mothers or bad mothers, and they're not given interesting roles. Like if you're over 35 here, it's considered you're older, and if you're actresses, they're only given like roles of mothers or wives or not very. I'm not saying those roles are interesting, but like their roles tend to get limited.
Hmm.
That was kind of a challenge I had with my second film, is because the protagonist was a middle-aged woman, because the people who put in the money was all kind of men, and they're not interested in seeing middle-aged women on screen. So
Unless they're a star, it seems like, if you can get away with it. But, and also too, I mean, sometimes I feel like Japan is 20 years ahead of the United States and 20 years behind the United States. Um, yeah, I noticed the laughter there. But I noticed that was a problem, a big complaint
mhm,
in American films 20 years ago, was there's just not parts for middle-aged women. And
mhm,
then they started doing parts for middle-aged women, but they weren't getting paid as much as the
right,
male counterparts. So
right,
it is something that is being dealt with all around the world.
mhm,
And it's just I'm hoping that it just seems to me obvious that, I don't know, like, there are stories to be told from every demographic, every perspective, and that, I don't know, I think stories about middle-aged women that aren't mom stories,
mhm,
or just that typical type of story,
mhm,
or even just the same old, like, we got to do a yakuza film or
mhm,
a samurai film. There are so many more interesting things happening in Japan.
mhm,
I wonder sometimes too, though, if part of that market would be people outside of Japan who have interest in Japan and
mhm,
the culture. I don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing
mhm.
there.
Yeah, so I guess US, like you have, actresses like Nicole Kidman or Demi Moore, who's substance was quite powerful.
Yeah.
Very shocking film. So I think they're changing that landscape. But over here, not only we have like a gender inequality, but also I was talking to Maya earlier that there's a very strong ageism.
Mm.
Uh,
Ageism, yeah.
they love the word called wakate, which means younger.
Mm-hmm.
Young directors, like wakate directors, wakate such and such, everything. If you're young, they invest money in you, and if you consider not from that group, they really don't. You gotta be established by then or something. So there's a strong ageism here, and if you're of a certain age, you're not given same kind of opportunities. I mean, I guess it's same everywhere, but
Well, it's better
like,
in some places, worse in some places.
yeah,
But I
most of
agree,
it.
it's needs to be, well, I think this stuff does solve itself over
Mhm,
time because people want,
mhm,
they have these stories, you know.
mhm,
And there have been, I think I watched the show Rebooting, which
mhm,
had Sakura Ando.
mhm,
She was in it, and I
mhm,
think she would technically be qualified as a middle-aged actress now, and
mhm.
she's phenomenal in everything she does.
Right.
And once again, I was in. I'm interested. So I think it's just, sometimes it takes culture to catch up. I hope
Yeah,
I mean, I hope
I don't
it's
know
happening
if
rapidly.
Japan's gonna really catch up, but I think the problem here is not only gender but the ageism, because although the people living longer and they're kind of encouraged to almost like a retire at the younger age, so and they're not given enough opportunities, so it's a problem.
Right. Yeah. I think though that this has to change and it's gradually changing. But I mean, like everything in Japan, it takes so much longer than anywhere else. But I think that we talked earlier about this, that basically the government here is very well aware of this
Mhm,
need for change. The
mhm,
thing is that, well, it's difficult to change the culture, the mindset again, because as you said, Mayu-san, a lot of the companies here, they just expect you to retire at 60,
mhm.
right? At the age of 60, and then with modern medicine, with
Yeah,
much
people
longer life.
living like
uh,
90. So
Yes,
I
Yeah.
even
people,
like
yes. Actually, I
It's
would
not
say
like
that,
Americans. We drop dead from the stress at like 62,
right,
just because it's
yeah.
just living here. There's no health insurance and we just die. But go ahead.
Right, but in Japan it's different. People are healthy. They have all that experience, life experience, professional experience at the age of 50, of 60, and they can contribute so much more. And it's becoming really interesting and ridiculous as well to see how some companies expect their employees to retire at the age of 60, which
Mhm.
is such a waste of talent and
Yeah, it's
experience.
pretty crazy, right?
It is, yes, yeah.
Getting
So,
back to this. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm so
oh
sorry.
no, no. So that's why it's so frustrating. Some of the government grants, or they have an age limit. Like you can't apply if you're like over 40 or something crazy. And the fact that they put age limits to grants is kind of infuriating or
Yeah.
discriminating. It's a very, I'm not sure about US, but it's a society that doesn't give you a second chance. I mean, if you're not certain way by certain age, you're kind of cut off. So it's it's a little bit it's not, yeah, it's very frustrating. You and it's discouraging, and I'm sorry, I'm like trashing the Japanese,
Oh
but
no.
No, no, no. It's
when I was
I
at
this
NYU,
show talks about this stuff.
yeah, when I was at NYU Film School, what I really liked about it was that not only came, we had like people from all different backgrounds, ethnicities, but we also had different age group. The oldest students was a 60-year-old woman who was a museum curator, wanted to get into more film world, and nobody had any discrimination against her. We thought she had more experience than us and so much to learn from her. And unfortunately, here, if you're a 60-year-old woman and then you go to graduate school and try to make a film with 20-year-olds, they will like make fun of you. So
Yeah, it's
that
I have heard that.
the
Yeah.
mindset of younger people sort of ridiculing people who are older is sort of here that I find it really kind of pissy. It's just I think it's not good.
But
And
yes, Mayu-san, sorry to jump again and to interrupt you. I think that this is actually a wonderful topic for documentaries and feature films because we have to work to change that attitude
mm,
and that mindset. And the more we talk about this, the better it is, and more
mhm,
people will become aware
mhm,
because everybody is headed to that age, you know.
right,
Sooner or
everybody,
later, you may be 20, you may be 30, you may be 40 years old, and if you're lucky enough to live long enough,
mhm,
you're going to be there, right?
right, right,
So,
yeah,
and very few people actually understand that. They think that, oh yeah, maybe in 15 years I'll be 60 years old, and what do I do then? So,
yeah,
and maybe raising that awareness is also, well, part of the film industry, or not part, one of the goals of the film industry or documentary filmmaking could be that as well.
yeah. I think what I realized, like when I was younger, people said like, "Oh, you can't be a director because I was a woman." And now, like people telling me, "Oh, you can't do this because you're like too old or too whatever to try new things." And I noticed like people around me, if they haven't made some success by a certain age, they kind of give up. They don't try anymore, which I think it's a societal thing that people kind of discouraged to try
Yeah, yeah.
trying.
And you say it is a society thing. I agree with you, but at the same time, my colleagues, because I have colleagues who retired, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, and
Mhm,
they retired when they were 60 years old, and some of them they were still eager to work, so they went on and looked for other jobs. Some of
mhm,
them found work, they're still working and so on. And some of them who said, well, I'm tired of working, they continue to dedicate their whole time to their hobbies.
mhm,
So, and they're very active in their local communities.
mhm.
So it's not like you're dead once you retire, you disappear. The thing is, I believe that some people just decide that it's too tiring to fight the system,
Mhm,
and too tiring to fight that perception that once
mhm,
retired you are nobody.
mhm,
So they decide to choose their hobbies, and
mhm.
other they of course they move to other jobs, of course. And I don't know the ratio there, so I have no figures, no hard data, but yeah, that's what I have seen from people around me.
Mhm, mhm. Sorry,
Mm.
I'm sort of digressing from a film questions,
Yeah,
but
sorry. Yes, no,
No.
that's okay, because it's important. I mean, the environment in which we work
mm,
and create our, or actually evolve
mm,
our projects is very important for the projects as well. It could be inspirational. It could be detrimental to the projects. So,
mm,
yeah, talking about the environment is important as well.
I have a question. I'm going to kind
mm,
of going with this. And by the way, I'm a middle-aged white guy, so like getting in this conversation, I'm being very careful
mm.
because I don't want to say anything that could be wrong. And which we
Okay.
always like.
Fine minds.
I'll
Like,
share a personal story real quick.
uh-huh.
So obviously, I had written a rom-com, and the character, the female lead, is a 27, 28-year-old Japanese female. And
Mhm,
I set it in Osaka because I wanted the Japanese characters to be kind of talky and a little bit boisterous. Da 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 da.
mhm,
But I remember when we were first shopping it around, some of the older producers would sit
mhm,
there and read it and be like, "Well, a Japanese woman wouldn't act like this at all." Like, because there's
mhm,
her and her aunt. Her aunt's older, and I
mhm,
made them more free spirited and fun. And then,
mhm,
well, that's not how a Japanese woman would actually be apologizing. Like, and I always find it's very fun how old men seem to know how Japanese women would behave in any given situation.
mhm,
So about a year later, I remember seeing all of a sudden when you see like the streamers and you see the Gen Z coming up,
mhm,
Japanese, females who are basically influencers, and
mhm,
they're very lively, very
mhm,
outspoken. And I'm like, see, this is where it's going. And I feel like in some ways, you know, the generation coming up in Japan
mhm,
is very different
mhm,
than let's say the millennials, Gen X, and the boomers. And
Right.
so my question is,
Mhm.
from your vantage point,
Mm.
is this a case where things could start changing very rapidly as one demographic fades, the
Mhm.
boomers leave the
Mhm.
workforce, and Gen Z gets brought into en masse?
I don't. It's hard to predict.
It is, isn't it? I would, but I'd love to know if you had
It's
opinion.
very hard to predict, but still, like, it's very male dominated. Companies are very male dominated and run by male. So I don't know if their perception of women is different. Some of the younger men, some of them are rebel, some of them are like shockingly conservative. It depends on where they're brought up. So it's hard to predict. But certainly women are more taking the challenge. And I think the unfortunate thing, which is different from my generation to the younger, is because the Japan as the country has weakened, so we don't have that many younger people studying abroad. In my days, we have more Japanese students like studying in film schools, but now we can't afford to even go overseas. So that's a little bit what worries me, because younger people here are not interested in going abroad, or even they had a chance to study abroad, they don't take that chance. That they think, because like now so many tourists and international visitors are coming, that people are interested in you and you don't have to go out there learn about the cultures, and they make all these kind of silly TV shows. Oh, all these people around the world are interested in Japanese and we're so great. So they're
Right.
brainwashed believing that you don't have to learn about other cultures and learn, try out, learn English and go travel, which is, I always think is the most important thing for, like, when I teach film school, I always say, learn English, get a driver's license, go travel,
Yeah, yeah.
go to other cultures, find new things. But right now, Japan is becoming too inward looking. The people only interested in, like, something happening in their own radius, because we can access the world through internet, that they feel they don't have to go away, travel and meet people that way.
Right. I agree with you that this tendency is very obvious nowadays, and we can see it in TV shows. We can see it also in TV dramas and everything.
Mm,
But I mean, my
mhm,
eternal optimist in me, also I can see that there is a positive twist to
mm,
this too. So, like everything, it's not just black or not just white.
mhm. Right.
But we know that for many people, Japan is described as maybe suffering or
Mm,
experiencing the Galapagos
mm,
syndrome,
mm.
because it's been cut off the world for a long time. And so,
Right.
because of that, it has developed its own culture, its own pop music, its own everything. And while I agree with you that traveling overseas and learning and trying to find, common ground and probably come up with new ideas that are on that intersection, it's still maybe not that bad to preserve what you have here as well
Right.
and keep it unique as possible. And of
Right.
course, many people might disagree with me, which is perfectly fine.
Mhm.
So it's just one perspective which I think we should not disregard.
Mhm.
Right? So maybe, yeah, there is a positive side
Well,
to it.
there's a positive, yeah, side for being this very enclosed
Mhm.
society. Um, but I kind of want to change that a little bit.
Right. Yeah.
Well, we learned more. We're part of a generation where, I mean, honestly, I look around what's going on with anything too political. It's like, what
Mhm.
the hell? We saw the Berlin Wall fall. Like, we
Mhm.
were very anti-populist, and we've seen populism rise all throughout the
Mhm.
world. And that tends to make the world pretty spooky if it
Mhm.
keeps going that way. And so so I think part of like our generation, we're just, I don't know, we're trying to figure that out because it's very, very strange. And I think getting to you, because you obviously have traveled back and forth between New York and Tokyo, and you still do. So like, what do you learn? What do you learn from going back and forth? Like, what experiences did you gain in New York that you think would be relevant for any young filmmaker right now who's in Japan?
Oh, I always say, because over here, people always talk about common sense. And I always say to the people, what's common sense here is not common sense outside.
Right. Yeah, I love that.
We're such a strange society that whatever they think is normal is not really normal outside. So I always tell my students, like, keep that perspective, because people over here is very kind of, what you call it, conformist society, because everybody has to be same, similar, so they kind of pressure you to be similar, right? Assimilate. Whereas New York is like, you can't talk about common sense because everybody has from like different backgrounds, so many different cultures and backgrounds that you can't talk about one common sense, one value. So that's kind of a good thing to keep in mind, that what you think is your normal is not normal for everyone, and everyone's so different, and be inclusive and accepting of those differences, which is the perspective the Japanese tend to lose because they were living in this very enclosed society. And what else? Yeah, so that's always keeps me, kind of alert about the differences. I was gonna say something else, but I just kind of escaped me. So
That's okay. Well, think about it. If you get to it, we'll just loop right back. Our conversations tend to be pretty free flowy, so that's
okay.
which is I think why people like it so much, because we're just having a nice conversation. So obviously you have 3 different projects. I mean, and I get that, because a lot of times, in even just any time in the arts, because one moves, the other doesn't, one gets stagnant. I think it's a very common theme in any sort of art production. Bands have that same thing. They work on one album, they try another album, and so on and so forth. You've worked in documentaries, and I know we had like Chiaki-san out of Saka Films, and she did her first narrative film. So you've done both. What do you find are the big differences between doing documentary and then doing narrative?
I always say there's not so much differences. In the sense that people consider documentaries as something that's like you're recording what's happening, but you're actually directing in many ways, and you sort of have a kind of a script in your head, like what's going to happen. Doesn't always happen that way, but you have a theme and direction you want to go to, and the only difference is you're directing real people. So it doesn't really always work the way you expect it to be. So that's the part of a challenge and part of fun, because there's always a discovery, and you're interfere in somebody's life, so it might change their life a little bit. So I think the only challenge with documentary is the people can turn around to you, say like, please don't shoot anymore. Get a, go. They don't want to be shot. And then you gotta like persuade them, this is important. Usually when they say turn off the camera, is the moment that's more interesting, because they're feeling vulnerable. They don't want to show this, which means that's the moment that's interesting.
Right.
So
Yeah.
people say don't shut off the camera. I don't. I pretend not shooting, but I'm actually shooting, and but then I don't try to be mean. Usually, like, I never had a problem with the end product, because I always tell them, not looking good is sometimes more interesting and make you more heroic, having that weak moments, because we're all human and people sympathize with that. But some people don't want to show that part. So they all say shut off the camera. But eventually, because if you have a respect for the subject and include that part with that respect, they understand. So my trick is when people say like shut off the camera, don't keep it running and use it with that respect, that you're not trying to make that person look bad, make them look more human. So that was one argument that
Yeah.
difference between the documentary and fiction. The documentary is like directing real people, so it's harder, but it costs less money, so it's easier to do. With the fiction, it's all about how to raise money, get right actors. Once you start shooting, it's not so hard.
I see. And I think this is so very
So sorry. I'm at my parents' house dog sitting. I apologize.
right. That's
They're out
okay.
in Ireland having the
Yeah.
time of their life. So
Right.
it's not that. Go main aside.
Oh
No,
no.
yeah. I wanted to say that it's so undervalued, showing the human,
Mm,
human. How can I say humanity of your subjects? Because when you shoot movies, right, we all know somehow that the actors are there to just to feature a different character, a person, and so on.
mhm,
But with documentaries, I think that it's so much. In a sense easier
mhm,
to touch upon the humanity of the people you talk about, right?
mhm,
And it is very undervalued because in this world, when we tend, to just form an opinion by reading a line on
mhm,
one line online, an opinion of somebody or something, then we do need a lot of nuance and we do need a lot of depth in
mhm,
showing that the other people, the people around us are as human as we are. And
mhm.
there is a lot of, once again, depth and nuance there. And I think that's really undervalued. So I wish that there were more documentaries actually out there than there were movies, and people would be more interested in
Yeah,
documentaries than they
I
were
mean,
in the
it's
movies.
going to be challenging because you always need that. It's the same thing as fiction. You need the drama, so you need to make the the person, the subject, has to suffer some ways. They gotta go through trials and they have to face, you know, maybe hidden past they don't want to face or take the challenge, and you sort of have to force people to encourage people to do that. So to face some past that they don't want to confront or do something. So it's a little bit more challenging than fiction, but it makes your fiction work easier because
I
you're
see.
dealing with the real people doing that, and then you're dealing with actors making it. It becomes a little bit easier.
So, what advice would
Mhm.
you give a young filmmaker in Japan starting out
Mhm.
from
Oh,
your experiences? What pitfalls? What would you tell somebody who's watching right now, young
oh,
filmmaker? This is your 101. This is your course. What would you tell them?
oh. Um, it's hard to say. Like when you're in the film schools, especially like more elite film schools, everybody think, oh, you're gonna be the next big thing and behave like. But the success, what is so hard to you know figure out what success is, and some people go to big film festival with their first films and they never get to make the second film, and that happened. I've seen that happen many times. And so, making that first success doesn't guarantee you. I think you just have to believe in what you do. And even if you didn't get that success right away, you have to persist. And oh, what I was going to say earlier was that the one thing that's very different from here in the US is that, especially when you're young, people don't encourage you to do things here. They always say, don't try, don't do
Right.
this, there's a
Yeah.
risk. And they try to pull your leg, so to speak. They always, say like, don't do this and the other. And I always tell my students like, don't listen to them because they like they always like tell you not to do things because you're gonna fail, you're not gonna succeed. It's your life,
Yeah.
what's there is problem like if you fail. It's better to try not that rather than listen.
Right.
So I guess I'll just say like even if you didn't succeed the way you envision it to be, then try again and keep trying, because even if other people say, "Oh, you're not going to succeed,"
Yeah.
so yeah, because this Japanese society is a very Galapagos enclosed society, that you have to be similar like the other people. So they, if you're trying to be the person who's different, they try to do all their power to try to discourage you to do things.
To be different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, some people justify that by saying that they're trying to reduce the risk for you because
Yeah.
they right, they don't believe that you will succeed, and if they don't believe that you'll succeed, then it means that they try to help you not to run
Or
through that risk, right? Right?
like
Not to
help.
run the risk of failing.
Yeah,
So
help in the parentheses. I'm like,
yeah,
don't
yes,
listen.
right.
It's your
And I
life.
grew up in small town America. I mean, it's you were in New York. That's a very different mentality. But old movie Hoosiers, where they talk about basketball, like zone defense is all we played in the past, and that's all that's going to work this year. So there's always that element, I think, of
Oh, small
not
town.
try it's partially to protect you from being sad of your own failures, but
Mhm,
sort of like this is how we do things, and this is how we're going to continue to do them. I think
mhm,
there's plenty of places in the world, I think, where that is also the case, and it's just.
mhm.
But I agree, you have to train people. Don't do that. You have to push through,
Right.
because it's like the chances are if you don't try is zero,
Right.
and you'd rather try. I think you can have a great life with like semi successes, and then that's actually a very successful life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What
I
does
always
success look
say
like to
to
you,
the
Nakamura-san?
yeah, I always say to the younger filmmakers, like, don't let other people set limits for yourself,
Yeah,
because you can limit yourself, but then like how, why do you let other people to set limits?
Yeah.
So it's your life. So, but then
Right.
here it just people tend to do that. So I guess it's the small town mentality in a nationwide scale.
yeah,
So we
yeah.
have to be kind of go up against that.
So in the end, Nakamura-san, as you're up, like, what does success look like to you, and what would be the number one thing you change right
Oh,
now in the Japanese film industry?
oh, that's a hard question. My dream is to, make a film not only in Japan but also in the US and other countries. Like I want to make more films like overseas, and make, work in between here and US and other places. So that's my personal objective. And for the film industry here, hmm, I think it's a very difficult place to survive, and people don't pay you enough, especially if you're doing things that you like. You know, we call it exploitation of likes. So if you're in the film and television industry, you're doing the sort of a fancy job, so you don't have to get paid. That's their mentality here. So if you're a director, you're better off like making more money as a crew person, because you get paid more, but your director get paid so much less. So I think the labor conditions, like payment, we don't have a contract. I mean, with the big studios they have, but like independent ones, they don't have contracts. Everything's like verbal, so there's always problem with the payment. Payment's so late. It takes them 2 months to get paid or something crazy. So I want to change that a little bit, make it, protect the film labor, you know, guarantee the payment. Sometimes you don't get paid here. It's crazy. Yeah.
It's funny because I think in the end with Japanese film, like we talked about it, where it's either big budget or no budget, and it
Hmm.
seems like there's no spot in the middle. Although in the last few years, films like Godzilla Minus One, which is only a $10 million film, or films like Koreeda, who does these lovely films. I hope, and for
Hmm.
any of you who's listening in the Japanese film studio, because I'm sure they're all on here right now, although we are
Hmm.
actually a pretty nice fan base, there is a market for mid-budget Japanese films. And if you have a budget for a mid-budget for a mid-level Japanese film, let's talk to Nakamura-san. She'll knock it out of the park. Yeah. So Nakamura-san, thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So for everyone watching, this is Japan Expert Insights, and we'll see y'all again in a couple of weeks.
Yes.
I'm going to go round the dogs up.
Okay.